religious practitioners, not just him, but he had groups of philosophers and scientists with him, just like Napoleon later had when he went to Egypt. But not just him. Plato, who's earlier than him, a century earlier, philosophers of that kind speak of the Eastern philosophers. They've met, they know about it. So these kind of currents of thinking are constantly moving east to west. You say, well, isn't anything going west to east? Not a lot. Now it is. Now we're setting all our ideas all over the world. But at that time, there was very little except comforting armies like Alexander going west to east. After a time, Christianity bounced back and started going east again. But it never really made huge progress in the east, did it? It sort of managed to get to India in certain forms, but in a very slim manner. Never made big inroads past, let's say, Asia Minor, or Palestine proper. It never did go that way. Everything came this way for some unknown reason. So the Krishna thing, to my mind, is very close to the Christ thing in the terms that you have a man God. He's a spiritual person. He's a physical person. He's got a similar name. You know, talk about anagrams. Basically, the only difference is a T in there rather than an N. And S and SH are basically the same letters in Middle Eastern. So, you know, you're very close. And he's a teacher, and he's a God at the same time, and he doesn't seem to die, and things like that. Krishna doesn't die either. Why? I mean, he doesn't go to heaven. That's a Western concept, heaven. Probably from the Greek gods who are up in heaven. But other than that, both are immortal in the sense that Christ even gets executed, but he doesn't die. He comes back from the dead, if you like. Then they go somewhere else, where it's hard to imagine. And Krishna goes someplace else because he achieves Krishna consciousness, if you will. He gets enlightenment, pure enlightenment. He becomes totally spiritual. The Jesus thing is a little more complicated, but it's not dealt with in the documents, because the historical documents have Jesus walking around with his apostles in the beginning of the book of Acts, and then somehow he evaporates or goes. Why he comes back just to go back to heaven again is a little bit confusing to me. But I mean, he's got resurrected, he's achieved that thing, and then first thing he does is leave again. So it's a bit confusing. Why didn't he just stay here forever? Why do you have to go up to heaven again? All that trouble to get back here. Think about that. So you say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, the literary people who write these things, you have to understand, these may or may not be historical events. If you're a believer, they are. But there's always human beings in the middle of this writing this thing. And human beings, as you know, always mess around with plots. We live in Hollywood, which is the center of plots. They just spin plots off endlessly. I just saw that movie Troy, and you wouldn't have recognized the Iliad in that movie. The scriptwriters got a hold of it, and wow, it was like something entirely. You had, as I think I told you, a woman with a bow and arrow, who was the heroine, and I can't even tell you the number of things that were not in Homer in that movie. And it was supposed to be a take-off, a really disappointing movie, because if they had followed Homer, they had a much better plot. But when the scriptwriters get onto something, and then they rewrite things. You take one plot and they give it to a new scriptwriter 20 years later, and he's already or she's already changed it into something else. So scriptwriters are really terrible people in the sense that they can do anything with historical material that they want. The King Arthur legends, I think we recently had a lot of feminist King Arthur movies. I mean, at one point, King Arthur, did such and such things. Now, Guinevere is a bow woman, and, this is to appeal to the so-called woman's lib side of things. So they just spin it in a different way. You say, you mean people spin things? Well, according to Bill O'Reilly, that's all people do is spin things. So the question is there spin going on in ancient times? Yeah, there is spin going on in ancient times, unfortunately. but we don't really realize that. We think that what we do in the modern time, the ancients were innocent of. In fact, it's the opposite. The ancients did it as much or more than we did. And we're just not familiar with ancient history, so we just don't know these things. I don't want to go any further than that, but just my lecture on why I think the Christian thing appeals so much to many Christians. What is the difference that appeals to people who are born Christian and looking for something else, but they don't want to go very far? Well, the Christian and the Buddha thing are very appealing to people, particularly in the Catholic faith for some reason. I don't know why Protestants seem to have less of an attraction. Buddhism is a very strong appeal to Catholic intellectuals. And again, I don't understand why that is. But what often they're looking for is a more personal religious experience, something that is not a ceremonial, something that, you know, doesn't have the sacraments that you participate in, but actually that you go through a personal process of enlightenment. But you still don't want to go far from the ideals that you have been taught, like turn the other cheek, pacifism, loving your neighbor, stuff like that. So